One number tells you almost everything about how World War II was actually fought. In 1945, the United States military paid the equivalent of around $666 in today's money to put a single rifle in a soldier's hands. That same year, the Soviet Union was arming its soldiers for roughly $85 a weapon. Same war, same enemy. One rifle cost nearly 8 times more than the other, and somehow, both sides won. What that gap reveals about each nation, its economy, its strategy, and its understanding of modern warfare is more interesting than any battle map. Start at the bottom of the cost ladder, and you find a rifle that was already ancient by the time the war began. The Soviet Mosin-Nagant had been in service since 1891, originally designed for the army of the Russian Tsar. By 1945 it was over 50 years old, chambered for a cartridge nearly as old as itself, and still rolling off production lines by the millions. The Soviets manufactured it at 2 main arsenals for the equivalent of about $5 wartime dollars per unit. There was nothing glamorous about it. 5 rounds, bolt action, brutally simple. But simplicity was the point. The Soviet military needed to arm an enormous force, replace catastrophic early losses, and keep fighting across thousands of miles of front. The Mosin-Nagant could be built fast, maintained by almost anyone, and handed to a soldier with minimal training. Its cheapness wasn't a flaw. It was a deliberate industrial strategy, dressed up as a firearm. Japan tells a different story. The Type 99 Arisaka entered the war as a genuine upgrade over its predecessor, shorter and chambered for a more powerful cartridge better suited to modern combat. Early production models were well made and reliable. But as the war dragged on and Japan's industrial base began straining under American pressure, quality control quietly collapsed. Late war examples were noticeably rougher, finished with less care, assembled from increasingly compromised materials. The unit cost sat at the equivalent of around $370 today, but what that money bought you depended entirely on when in the war the rifle was made. Same weapon. Wildly different reality. Germany's entry on this list reflects something that defined German military production across almost every category, an obsession with engineering that was equal parts impressive and self-defeating. The Karabiner 98K was developed from a lineage stretching back to the Gewehr 98 of the First World War, refined across multiple iterations into one of the most accurate and well-built bolt-action rifles of the entire conflict. Over 14 million were produced across the war years. The cost in today's terms came in at roughly $407 per unit. For that price, a German soldier got a weapon that felt like a precision instrument, because it essentially was one. The problem was that precision costs time, costs labor, and costs money that Germany, fighting on multiple fronts with shrinking resources, could increasingly not afford. The K98K was excellent. It was also, in retrospect, more rifle than the situation required. Britain's Lee-Enfield No. 4 sits just behind the American rifle in cost, running the equivalent of about $628 today, including its bayonet. What that money bought was arguably the finest bolt-action combat rifle of the entire war. The Lee-Enfield family had been refined since 1895, and the No. 4 was the streamlined, battle-tested result of decades of lessons. Its 10-round magazine gave British soldiers a meaningful rate-of-fire advantage over their German counterparts carrying 5-round weapons. Trained soldiers could reliably fire 15 aimed rounds per minute. In the right hands, it was fast enough that German troops in the early war occasionally reported coming under what they believed was machine gun fire from small British infantry units. The price bought genuine capability. And then there is the American M1 Garand, which cost the equivalent of $666 per rifle and represented something none of the other weapons on this list could claim. It wasn't a bolt action at all. Semi-automatic, gas-operated, fed by an 8-round clip, the Garand let a soldier fire as fast as he could pull the trigger without ever working a bolt between shots. General George Patton called it the greatest battle implement ever devised. Over 5 million were built. Against enemies still cycling bolts between every round, American infantry carried a weapon that fired fundamentally differently. That cost premium bought a generational leap in individual firepower, which brings you back to that original number. For every Garand America built, the Soviet Union manufactured roughly 7 Mosin-Nagants at the same total cost. 2 entirely different answers to the same question. How do you arm a nation for the worst war in human history? One country chose volume, the other chose capability. Both were right.